This is Michael.
This is Pablo.
It's eTrend giving our take on what's working for e-commerce and digital marketing in today's digital landscape. What's going on, Pablo?
Not much, Mikey. Another day, another dollar.
Another day, another dollar. Not much. Wrapping up the end of the day and ready to get right into it.
Very good. Today, what we're going to talk about is web accessibility and why it matters. So I'm going to dive right in a little bit here and give a quick anecdote story, and then we'll get into it. So I guess now it's been a few months, I got a call from someone, and it was a site I sold, and they called me and they said, "Hey, you'll never guess what happened. I just got a lawsuit handed to me, and you'll never believe why." And I'm said, "Okay, no, I have no idea. Tell me." It's like, well, there was a person that can't really see, let's call it legally blind, and they couldn't really browse the website, and they're suing us because apparently they couldn't browse our site. Now, I've personally, of course, I've heard of some of these issues before, but when he told me that, it's as uncommon as it is. If you start doing the research, it's becoming more and more common now. So I think it's something to definitely look into if you own an e-commerce site, or any site for that matter. Actually, if you are in the digital space, this is something definitely to start taking note of. And with that, Mikey, give us your take on what is web accessibility. I know there's the acronym ADA, I believe, and why it matters.
For websites is specific on two aspects. One is on the development side of it and on the back-end code, and the other part is on the front end of what the user gets out of it. Now, the lawsuits first started coming up in 2003 or so, and then no one really heard much about it. And then a couple years ago, after the big Domino's lawsuit, it started getting a lot of mainstream attention because of the settlement, because people could relate to Domino's. And then from there, back in 2018 is when the WCAG 2.1 standards came out. Now, WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There are 3 levels of website accessibility. You have A, which is the essentially doing the bare minimum, AA, which is the standard, and AAA means you're fully compliant. Now, the AA is the standard for most websites. AAA is very specific for primarily websites that assist people with disabilities. So if you're offering some sort of service for someone who is visually impaired, then you would be expected to maintain the AAA standard. WCAG 2.1 gave 17 new guidelines that basically sit on top of the 2.0 guidelines. Now, these guidelines dictate how the website should function. So if someone is, like you said, visually impaired, they should still be able to navigate the site. Now, the screen readers are very advanced. They're able to read images from the alt tags. They're able to read where the menus are, the text on the site, how to navigate from one page to the next. And these guidelines dictate the user experience. Now, 1 in 5 users have some sort of disability that can benefit from having an accessible website. This is everything from someone who's hearing impaired, where if they want to watch a video, you should have translation so they can understand it. If someone is visually impaired, you should be able to have your website change colors, because maybe perhaps someone is colorblind and they wouldn't be able to decipher between different colors. You can't necessarily have color be the lead selling point on something. So if you're selling something red, it's important to make sure that someone who would be unable to identify the color red understands what they are looking at and what they're buying.
Quick question for you to put it in context for those that are listening, of course, is what's the big Domino's lawsuit? You mentioned a big Domino's lawsuit, which kind of set this off in a way. Do you know what that was?
The Domino's lawsuit involved a man who was visually impaired. He was blind and was unable to access the site. Now, these guidelines for accessibility were put together stating that it's a fundamental right that someone's not discriminated against. The same way when you go to an office building or a grocery store, there's handicap uh, parking spots in front. If you go into a restaurant, into the restrooms, there's handrails. The stalls are big enough to accommodate a wheelchair. It's the website's no different, and it's finally about time that the guidelines are being more enforced into the internet. The retailers can be held accountable, and it allows anyone to be able to not be discriminated and to use and access a website or a mobile app or a PDF the same way that someone who did not have that disability.
I guess somebody's question would be like, okay, how do I make my website compliant? But don't answer that, because that's actually going to be our next podcast, right? We're going to give definitely some tips and guides into how to start that process. But in short, if somebody says, hey, Mike, what's web accessibility? You gave us what's the shortest answer you can give?
Making a website accessible to anyone who wants to access your site, regardless of having a disability or not having a disability. They should get essentially the same output from your website. If you're trying to sell something, they should be able to purchase it. If you're offering a service, they should be able to understand what that service is. And they should be able to complete the same steps and the same processes as anyone else.
Perfect. So why it matters is because this is becoming more and more enforced, like Mike said. It's a real thing. If you hear it and you're like, it's probably not going to happen to me, I'm too small, somebody's not going to really come to my site and complain, that's completely false. We've both seen it happen, and that's why we're talking about this now. We think it's something to really, really consider and be on top of mind. So with that said, we'll wrap it up here, and we'll have more info on tips and guides on web accessibility soon.
Take it easy.
Take it easy.